Adi stood at the entrance of her father's compound, her wrapper torn at the shoulder, her eyes hollow from crying. The same compound that had once overflowed with suitors and laughter and the smell of rich food now sat quiet in a way that made the air feel heavy. She had nothing. No husband. No home. No servants. Nothing but the face that had once made the whole village stop and stare. And as she stood there trembling, it was not beauty that opened the door. It was her sister's voice from inside saying, "Let her in." Welcome to Stories by Enitan friends. Please like, share, and subscribe. In the village of Omuna, where the red earth burned warm under the sun and the iroko trees stood tall like old men who had seen everything, there lived a man named Dyke. He was a farmer of considerable standing, a man whose yam barn was never empty and whose name carried weight in the village square. People said that Dyke had been blessed twice by the gods. His farm was fruitful. His wife, Mbik, was wise. And together they had produced 2 daughters who were spoken about from one end of Umune to the other, though never for exactly the same reasons. The first daughter was named Adis, and from the moment she arrived in the world, it was as though the gods had taken particular care with her. Her skin was deep and smooth like the inside of a fresh palm kernel. Her eyes were bright and wide and carried a warmth that made strangers feel known. When she walked, there was something in the movement of her body that made people turn without meaning to, the way a flame draws the eye even when you are not cold. She was not vain, not at first. She was simply a girl who had been told since birth that she was beautiful, and had grown comfortable inside that truth the way a person grows comfortable inside a well-fitted wrapper. The second daughter came 3 years later and her name was Chisom. She was quieter, plainer by the village's measure, the kind of child whose entrance into a room did not rearrange it. She had her mother's steady eyes and her father's wide hands and a stillness about her that some people mistook for sadness and others mistook for slowness. Neither was true. Chisom was simply a girl who had learned very early that the world was not going to pause and make room for her, and so she had decided, without drama and without bitterness, to build her own room. The village noticed Adis first. This was simply how things were. Market women would stop Mbik on the road to praise the older girl, lifting her chin gently between 2 fingers, turning her face side to side the way one examines a particularly fine piece of cloth. "This one will marry a king," they would say, laughing with the easy confidence of people making a prediction they were certain of. And behind Adis, a half step back, Chisom would stand and watch and say nothing. She had heard this particular conversation many times. She knew her own name was coming. She knew what they would say about her. And this one woman asked once, turning to look at Chisom with the same appraising eye, though with less enthusiasm. She studied her for a moment. "She will marry a good man," she said finally, with the tone of someone trying to be generous. "What is a good man?" another woman asked, laughing. "A man who comes home," the first replied, and the whole group burst into laughter, the kind of laughter that is not entirely unkind but lands like a small stone regardless. Adis glanced back at her sister with a flicker of something apologetic in her eyes. Chisom simply smiled. Not the smile of someone who is pretending not to be hurt, but the smile of someone who had already decided that other people's limited imagination was not her problem to carry. It was Mbik who understood this about her younger daughter. She saw it in the way Chisom watched rather than spoke, in the way she stored knowledge the way a careful woman stores grain, quietly and without display. And so Mbik began, in the evenings when the compound was quiet, to teach Chisom things the village did not think to teach its plainer daughters. She taught her how to read the soil, which patches held moisture and which drained too fast. She taught her how to negotiate at the market, how to know when a trader was inflating a price and how to walk away in a manner that brought the price down without a single argument. She taught her how to plan through a bad season, how to stretch resources without breaking them, how to build trust with people slowly and keep it carefully. These were not glamorous lessons. They did not come with praise or an audience. They were the kind of lessons that only show their value years later, when everything else has failed. One evening Chisom sat beside her mother grinding pepper, the rough stone moving in slow circles, the sharp scent rising between them. She was 12 years old. She had just come from the market where a group of women had spent 10 full minutes discussing how Adis was going to be the most beautiful bride Umina had ever produced. "Mama," Chisom said, not looking up from the grinding stone. "Do you think they are right about Adis?" Mbik was quiet for a moment, watching her daughter walk. "Right about what, specifically?" "That beauty is the most important thing a woman can have." Mbik set down the piece of dried fish she was holding and looked at her daughter steadily. "Beauty opens the first door," she said. "But it cannot build what is on the other side. I am teaching you how to build." Chisom looked up then. Her mother's eyes were serious and warm at the same time, the way eyes are when someone is telling you something they need you to remember. "But nobody will let me through the first door," Chisom said quietly. "Some doors," Mbik said, picking up the fish again, "you build yourself." Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. The years passed in the way years pass in a village, slowly in daily life and quickly in the memory. Adis grew into the woman the market women had predicted. By the time she was 19, the compound was never quiet. Suitors arrived from 3 villages, sometimes 4, with wine and cola and gifts arranged carefully in baskets. Dyke would sit in the courtyard receiving them with the dignified pleasure of a man whose faith in his eldest daughter had been confirmed by the world. He was not a cruel father. He was simply a man who found it easier to love the daughter the world was already applauding. Chisom, meanwhile, had become someone else entirely, though the village had not noticed. She had taken everything her mother planted in her and grown it in directions nobody was watching. She had started a small trade in groundnut oil, buying in bulk from a farmer 2 villages away and selling at a margin that she reinvested before she spent. She kept a careful record of every transaction in a small book she had bought with her first profit. She had learned, through 3 years of patient effort, to read the farm's needs the way an experienced healer reads a body, not by what it showed on the surface but by what it was telling in small signs. The older farmhands had begun to respect her. One man named Oku, who had worked the land for Dyke since before the girls were born, said something one afternoon that nobody paid particular attention to at the time. "That Chisom," he said, leaning on his hoe and watching her instruct a younger worker on which ridges needed more compost. "She sees things in this land that her father doesn't even see." The person he was speaking to nodded and said nothing further. In Omuna, the observations of farmhands were not the kind of thing that made it into the conversations that mattered. What made it into the conversations that mattered was Obiora. He arrived on a dry season morning with the kind of entrance that the village of Omuna would talk about for years. He was from Oguta, a larger, wealthier settlement 2 days' journey away, and he came with a delegation of 12 men, all dressed in matching fabrics, or carrying gifts that exceeded anything Umina had seen from a suitor. There were lengths of imported cloth, a small chest of jewelry, 4 live goats, and 2 enormous yams tied together with palm fiber that were, by all accounts, the largest anyone in the village had ever seen. He was handsome in the way wealthy men sometimes are, not because of his features specifically but because of the confidence that came with knowing he could have most things he wanted. He sat in Dyke's courtyard and spoke well, used the correct proverbs, honored the elders with appropriate deference, and made everyone around him feel that choosing his family would be choosing well. Then Adis walked out to greet the guests. What happened in that moment was not subtle. Obiora's carefully composed expression shifted. Not dramatically, not rudely, but in the small way that a man's face shifts when he sees something he has already decided to have. He looked at Adis the way the market women had always said a worthy man would look at her, as though she had answered a question he had not yet finished asking. The negotiation that followed was long in form but short in substance. Both families knew how it would end before it began. Obiora wanted Adis. Dyke was prepared to be honored. Mbik sat in the circle of women watching with an expression that was harder to read, her eyes moving between the suitor and her older daughter and occasionally, briefly, to where Chisom sat at the edge of the gathering, helping serve water to the visitors. That evening, after the guests had gone, Mbik found Chisom washing the clay cups at the back of the compound. The sky was the dark red of a fire burning down. "You were quiet today," Mbik said. "There was nothing to say," Chisom replied, setting a cup to dry. "What did you see?" Chisom paused in her washing. This was a thing her mother did, asked not what she thought but what she saw, as though sight was more honest than opinion. "I saw a man who chose quickly," Chisom said. "Men who choose quickly choose the thing they can see. They don't always know what they've missed." Mbik was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed something into Chisom's wet hand. It was a small woven bracelet, the kind Mbik had worn on her own wrist for as long as Chisom could remember. "Your time is coming," Mbik said. "Don't let them make you small while you wait." Now, if this story is speaking to you, drop a comment below. Have you ever been overlooked while someone else received all the praise? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like this video. It helps more people find stories like this one. The wedding of Adiz and Obiora was the kind of event that becomes a measure for other events. For years afterward, when Omina held a celebration, someone would always say, "It was good, yes, but not like the day Adiz married." The drums played from morning until the stars appeared. Women danced in rotating groups, each one trying to outdo the last. The food was so abundant that the pots were still full when the last guest went home, and the guests were the kind of people who ate with full commitment. Dyke sat at the center of it all with the dignity of a man at the peak of his life's achievement. He had given his beautiful daughter to a wealthy man from a good family. The village had witnessed it. The gods had been honored. What could go wrong? Chisom organized the kitchen that day. She was the one who coordinated the cooking groups, managed the firewood, tracked how much food was going out against how much remained, and quietly redirected resources when one area was running low. She worked from before sunrise until after the celebration ended, and when it was done and the compound was quiet again, she washed her hands, sat down in the corner of the courtyard, and let herself be tired for exactly as long as she could afford. Nobody gave a speech about what she had done. There was no moment where the compound paused to acknowledge that the wedding had run smoothly because of her hands. She did not expect one. She had learned not to wait for acknowledgement. Acknowledgement was a luxury. What mattered was that the thing was done well. Adiz left for Obiora's compound in Oguta the following morning. She stood in the courtyard with her boxes packed and her face luminous even in grief, because she was leaving her family, and even the most joyful departures carry some weight when you are 19 and the people you love are standing in a row watching you go. She held Chisom for a long time. "I will miss you more than anybody," Adiz whispered. "I know," Chisom said, holding her back. "Go and build something beautiful." Adiz pulled back and looked at her sister. "Something in the way you said that," she murmured. "Go," Chisom said, smiling. "Your husband is waiting." For 2 years, the reports from Oguta were everything the village had hoped for. Obiora was generous. The compound was large. Adiz had 2 house girls and a cook and a compound that visitors described with the kind of detail that signals genuine awe. She dressed well, ate well, was seen at every important occasion on her husband's arm. The market women of Umina received this information with satisfaction, as though her success confirmed something about their original assessment of her. What the reports did not include, because Adiz herself did not send these details, was the other thing. The slow thing. The thing that had been growing quietly underneath the prosperity like rot beneath beautiful wood. Obiora's business operated at the kind of scale that required constant new investment, and the returns, while real, were slower than the investment. For the first 2 years, the balance held. By the 3rd year, it had begun to tilt. Obiora was not a dishonest man. He was not a gambler or a drinker. He was simply a man who had expanded faster than his foundation could support, who had made several large commitments based on projected income that did not arrive on schedule, and who had, in the particular way of proud men, decided to protect his wife from this knowledge rather than bring her into it. So Addis continued to live the life of a prosperous woman right up until the morning the house girls did not come. She walked to a quiet compound and walked to the kitchen to find it cold. She walked to the gate and found it unlocked in a way that felt different from the usual unlocked gate. She walked back inside and found Obiora sitting at the table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, looking at them as though he had never seen them before. "Obiora," she said. "What is happening?" He looked up. The face she saw was one she had not seen before, stripped of the performance of confidence, raw in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. "I have lost the business," he said. "All of it. The debt is large. We cannot stay here. The compound belongs to the creditors now." Addis sat down slowly across from him. The room felt like it was tilting. "How long have you known?" she whispered. 8 months, he said. 8 months. While she had been dressing well and attending occasions and believing in the life she thought she was living, her husband had been carrying a collapsing world on his back and saying nothing. The betrayal of that silence was its own wound, separate from the financial disaster, deeper in some ways. She stood up, walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and allowed herself 2 minutes to feel what she was feeling, which was terror and rage, and underneath both of those, a sudden rushing awareness of something she had never noticed before. She did not know how to do anything. Not the urgent practical things that were now required. She did not know how to cook beyond the basic things the house girls had shown her when she occasionally wandered into the kitchen out of curiosity. She did not know how to manage money because Obiora had managed the money. She did not know which traders to trust, which routes to take, which decisions to make when the ground disappeared from under her feet. She had been so thoroughly sheltered by beauty and wealth that she had never been required to develop the muscles a person needs when shelter is gone. For the first time in her life, Addis felt the particular code of being beautiful in a situation that required something else entirely. They packed what they could carry. They left before the creditors arrived. And Addis, who had been carried to her wedding in a decorated vehicle while the whole village drummed, walked back into her father's compound on an ordinary afternoon with 2 bags and a husband who could not meet anyone's eyes. The compound was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. Dyke came out first, and his face moved through several expressions quickly, landing finally on a controlled concern that a loving father wears when he is frightened and trying not to show it. "What has happened?" he asked. "Papa," Addis said, and her voice broke on the single word, and then she was crying in a way she had not cried since she was a child, the full-body crying of someone who has been strong past the point of being able to hold it. Obiora explained to Dyke in the quiet way of a man making a confession he has no choice but to make. Dyke listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of terrible, because Dyke was a man who talked, who had opinions and expressed them, and his silence meant he was too shocked for words. Mbik appeared in the doorway. She looked at Addis, then at Obiora, then at the bags on the ground. Her face did not show surprise. It showed something that was harder to read, something between sorrow and a terrible patience, the expression of a woman who had seen further down the road than everyone else and had been hoping she was wrong. Inside the compound, there was one person who came out without being called. Chisom appeared from the back of the house, wiping her hands on a cloth, and she looked at her sister for exactly 1 moment before crossing the courtyard and pulling Addis into an embrace that lasted a long time. She did not say anything immediately. She simply held her sister and let her cry. "It is going to be all right," she said finally, very quietly, into Addis' hair. "You don't know that," Addis wept. "I know some things," Chisom said. "If you are still watching, this story is about to reach the part that will give you chills. Subscribe now so you never miss a story from this channel. And drop a comment telling me which sister you relate to more. I read every single one. What nobody in Umuna was prepared for was what came next, not the fall of Obiora's business, because misfortune was a thing villages had seen before, but the second blow, the one that arrived 30 days after Addis and Obiora returned to her family's compound. Dike collapsed. He was walking between the yam ridges on a morning that was like any other morning, and then he was on the ground, and Oku the farmhand was shouting for people to come. By the time they carried him into the house, his breathing was shallow and uneven, and the side of his face had changed in a way that made Big press her hand to her mouth and close her eyes for one long moment before she opened them and began giving instructions. The illness was serious. The kind that required medicine from the town, the kind that cost money, real money, not the household money that remained in the compound's small box, which Chisom counted that evening and found amounted to roughly enough for 4 days of treatment and not a single day more. The compound that night was the quietest place in Umuna. Adi sat beside her father's sleeping form and held his hand. Obiora sat in the courtyard staring at the ground with the expression of a man who was aware, with fresh and terrible precision, of exactly how useless he currently was. Mbik moved through the house like water around stones, doing the next necessary thing without pause, without visible despair, without wasting the energy of falling apart. And Chisom sat at the small table in the corner of the back room, her oil lamp burning low, her small accounting book open in front of her, and she thought. She was not panicking. This was the thing about Chisom that nobody who had only seen her standing half a step behind her sister could have predicted. She did not panic, not because she was not afraid, but because she had, in the years when nobody was watching, built inside herself the particular capability of thinking clearly while afraid. Her mother had taught her this. Life had reinforced it. She looked at what they had. She looked at what was owed. She looked at the farm, which was in good condition because she had been managing its needs quietly for years while Dike focused on his public obligations. She thought about Isaac. Isaac was a merchant who operated from the large market in Oguta, a man of 70 years and considerable wealth and, more importantly, considerable observation. He had been trading through Umuna and its neighboring villages for 4 decades. He knew which families were genuinely prosperous and which were performing prosperity. He knew which farmers would repay a debt and which would delay until the debt became a conflict. He was the kind of man who made decisions based on pattern, on track record, on what a person had done consistently over time when no one was particularly watching. He had watched Chisom. Not deliberately, not with any particular intention, but in the way that observant people watch the things around them as a matter of habit. He had seen her at the market for 3 years, always on time, always with correctly measured goods, always paying exactly what she owed on the day it was due. He had seen her negotiate without aggression and without desperation. He had seen her make decisions that other, more celebrated traders did not have the patience or the knowledge to make. He had said, once, to his trading partner, the second daughter of Dykes. The quiet one. She is the one you want to do business with. The world just doesn't know it yet. Chisom walked to Isaac's compound before sunrise. She had not slept. She had spent the night preparing what she needed to say, stripping it down to its essential truth, removing everything that was asking and leaving only what was offering. Isaac's gateman admitted her after a brief wait. She found the old merchant sitting in his courtyard in the early morning half-dark, drinking palm wine with the unhurried manner of a man who had long since stopped feeling the need to perform industry. He looked at her when she came in. He did not look surprised. "Dyke's daughter," he said. "Sit down." She sat. She looked at him directly. "My father is ill. The treatment costs more than we have. The farm is good, the soil is ready, but the season needs starting capital we do not currently possess. I am asking for a credit arrangement. I am offering the farm's first harvest as security, plus a 20% return on whatever you advance, paid within 6 months." Isaac studied her for a long moment. He turned his cup slowly in his hands. "Why should I give credit to a family whose son-in-law just failed publicly in Oguta?" he asked. Not unkindly. Practically. Because the son-in-law's failure has nothing to do with this farm, Chisom said, and the farm's record has nothing to do with him. You know what this land produces when it is properly managed. You have bought from it for 10 years. Your father manages this farm. My father has been ill, Chisom said. I have been managing this farm for 4 years. Oku can confirm this. The records will confirm this. She placed her small accounting book on the table between them. Everything is here. Isaac looked at the book without touching it. Then he looked at her. 10 years, he said slowly, I have been trading through this village. I have watched traders come up and fall down. I have watched families build and collapse. Do you know what separates the ones that build from the ones that fall? Chisom waited. Consistency when nobody is applauding, he said. I have watched you for 3 years in that market. Always on time. Never short. Never desperate. He picked up the accounting book now and opened it, turning through the pages slowly, his experienced eyes moving across the columns. His expression did not change, but something in his posture settled slightly, the way a decision settles into a body when it is made. 20% in 6 months is too generous, he said, closing the book and setting it back in front of her. I will take 15. And I will advance you twice what you asked for, because your calculation was conservative and the land can do more than you are giving it credit for. Chisom's chest moved with a breath she had been holding since she left the compound that morning. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Isaac said. I am not doing this for generosity. I am doing this because it is a sound investment. Thank me by proving I calculated correctly. She stood to leave. He spoke again, without looking up from his wine. I have one more thing to say to you, Dyke's daughter. She stopped. I have watched you stand behind your sister for 20 years while this village looked past you. I want you to know that the people who were watching the right thing saw you. We saw you the whole time. Chisom stood with her back still turned for one moment, absorbing this. Then she walked out into the morning, which was becoming light. Now here is where it gets even more intense. Keep watching. And if someone you know needs to hear a story like this one today, share this video with them right now. What happened over the next 6 months in the compound of Dyke was the kind of thing that small villages absorb slowly, the way ground absorbs heavy rain, through layers, with some resistance, until eventually the new truth is simply part of the landscape. Chisom moved through that season with a focus that silenced criticism before it could form. She organized the farm with a precision that Oku said he had not seen in 30 years of working the land. She divided the work into sections and assigned each one based on the individual skill of the worker, which meant nothing was wasted and no one was positioned to fail. She introduced a crop rotation she had been planning quietly for 2 years, waiting for the moment she would have full authority over the decisions. The result was a farm that produced a third more than it had in any previous season, from the same land, with the same workers. She brought Adis into the work from the first week. This was not cruelty and it was not a lesson delivered with superiority. It was simply that there was work and Adis was present and capable of learning, and Chisom treated her exactly the way Mbik had once treated Chisom, directly and without making the lesson feel like punishment. Come, she said one morning, appearing in the doorway of the room where Adis was sitting. I will show you how this kitchen operates. Adis looked up. She had been sitting in that room for 3 days in the specific paralysis of someone whose entire framework for existing has collapsed. She had not been crying. She had been doing something worse than crying. She had been sitting still. I don't know how to do anything, Adis said. Her voice was flat. That is the truth. I am 24 years old and I do not know how to do anything that matters. I know, Chisom said. That is why I am here to teach you. Come. Adis followed her to the kitchen. The first week was difficult. Adis burned things, cut her fingers, rinse 2 pots of soup through impatience, and cried twice in the corner of the kitchen when she thought Chisom was not looking. Chisom was always looking. But she said nothing about the crying, only redirected, corrected, demonstrated again, and kept moving. By the 3rd week, Adis was cooking without supervision. By the 5th, she had begun adapting recipes, adjusting seasoning, trying combinations that showed an instinct she had not known she possessed. There was a morning she made a groundnut soup that Mbik tasted in silence and then looked at with an expression that was not surprise but was something close to it. "Where did you learn that combination?" Mbik asked. "I just thought it through," Adis said, looking slightly startled herself. "I thought about what was missing and I tried to add it." Mbik looked at Chisom across the kitchen. Chisom looked back and said nothing. But the small lift at the corner of her mouth said something. Obiora had been quiet through all of this. He had been the kind of quietly present that a man is when he knows he has failed and does not yet know how to be useful. He helped where he could, carried water, cleared land, did the physical work without being asked. But there was something restless in him, a man-shaped question that had not yet found its answer. He came to Chisom one evening while she was reviewing the farm records. He stood at the door of the back room for a moment before she acknowledged him. "Come in," she said without looking up. He came in and sat across from her. He was quiet for a long time. She let him be quiet. She had learned that men who were trying to say something difficult needed the silence to gather in before the words could come. "She is different," he said finally. Chisom looked up. "Who?" "Adis." He paused. I knew she was beautiful. I knew the whole village knew she was beautiful. I chose her because of what I could see." His voice had the specific quality of a man examining himself with an honesty he finds uncomfortable. "I never looked for the rest." "Most people don't," Chisom said. Not bitterly. Just truthfully. "That was wrong," Obiora said. "Yes," Chisom agreed. He was quiet again. "Then, she is braver than I thought. Braver than I am right now." "She is discovering herself," Chisom said. "That is the most important thing a person can do." She needed the ground to be taken from her before she would look for her own feet. Obiora looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most unusual person I have ever met," he said. "I mean that as the highest possible thing I know how to say." "I know," Chisom said, and turned back to her records. The harvest came in the 5th month, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, in quantities that made Oku walk through the barn twice because he could not quite believe what he was counting. Chisom paid Isaac his return on the 6th-month mark, on the agreed day, with every figure exactly as promised. She added a small gift, palm oil of the highest quality from the farm, not because it was required but because it was the kind of gesture that remembered the man, not just the transaction. Dyke recovered. Not completely, not with the full strength of his younger years, but enough to sit in his courtyard again, enough to walk slowly to the edge of the farm and see what had happened to it in his absence. He stood at the boundary of his land for a long time. On the first day he was strong enough to go there, looking at rows that were fuller and more organized than he had ever kept them, looking at the barn that was stocked beyond his best season, looking at all of it. Oku appeared beside him. "Chisom," was all the old man said, gesturing at everything around them. Dyke said nothing immediately. He stood there with his face doing the slow work of rearranging itself around a truth it was receiving, a truth that had apparently been present for years and that he had not been looking at. "I have not seen her," he said. Not to Oku. To the air in front of him. "She has been here, in this ground, in this barn, in everything, and I have not been seeing her." Oku said nothing. Some things do not need a response. The day everything came together was the day of the village gathering, the quarterly meeting where community matters were discussed and disputes settled and announcements made. It was not a celebration specifically, but it drew the whole village, which meant it drew the same women who had once stood on the road and predicted Adi's brilliant future and Chisom's adequately decent one. Chisom was there with the farm's trading records, presenting accounts for a collective arrangement she had organized with 2 other farming families, a joint supply agreement with a large market in the next town that guaranteed fixed prices for 3 seasons ahead. It was a thing that had never been done in Umina before because it required the kind of sustained coordination and mutual trust that was rare and difficult to build. She had built it over 4 months, quietly, one conversation at a time. When she stood to explain the arrangement to the gathered community, the village was quiet in the particular way a village goes quiet when it is paying attention rather than simply waiting for someone to finish speaking. Isaac was there. He had made the journey from Oguta specifically, which was not a small thing for a man of his years. He sat in the front row of the gathering and watched Chisom speak with the focused attention of a man watching an investment perform exactly as calculated. When she finished, it was Isaac who rose first. "I have traded through 20 villages in 40 years, he said. His voice carried the authority of his age and his record. "I have seen good farmers and bad ones. I have seen families rise and fall." He paused, looking around the gathering with the deliberate patience of a man who knows the weight of what he is about to say. "The arrangement this woman has built will bring more reliable income to 3 farming families in this village than anything Umina has produced in a decade. I advanced her capital 6 months ago on the basis of her record and her understanding, and I was repaid in full, ahead of schedule." He paused again. "I want this village to hear me say clearly what I should have said publicly a long time ago. The wealth in this compound has been growing in Chisom for 20 years. You were all looking at the wrong daughter." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Then it was broken, not by the village elders, not by Dyke, but by one of the market women who had stood on the road years ago and predicted Adi's kinship and Chisom's acceptable adequacy. She was a woman named Ngozi, old now, sharp-eyed, with the particular courage of someone who had decided honesty was more important than pride. She stood up and she looked at Chisom. "We were blind," she said simply. "Forgive us for being blind." Chisom looked at her steadily. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "You saw what you were taught to see. I was simply building while you were looking elsewhere." The gathering exhaled. And in that exhale was something shifting, a communal rearrangement, 20 years of assumption releasing its hold. Dyke rose slowly from where he sat among the elders. His walking was careful now, measured since the illness, but his presence was unchanged. He walked to the center of the gathering and stood before his daughter. "I have a thing to say that should have been said many years ago," he began. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that cost something. "I loved both my daughters. I believed I showed it equally. I did not." He stopped. Looked at Chisom. "I showed my love to the daughter the world was already celebrating. I gave your sister the parties and the suitors and the praise, and I gave you," he paused, something moving in his throat, "I gave you less attention because you did not need me to cheer for you. You simply did the work." He stopped again. "I was wrong to take your silence as permission to overlook you. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you were working." His voice broke slightly on the last word. "Chisom, look at your father." She looked at him. "I am proud of you," he said. "I should have been saying that every year of your life. I am sorry I began so late." Chisom stood for a moment, and for the first time in front of a crowd, she did not compose her face into its usual stillness. She let it be what it was, which was moved, and full, and slightly undone in the way a person becomes undone when they receive something they had trained themselves not to need because they feared it would never come. "You gave me Mama," she said. "She saw me first." That was enough. But her voice said it was more than enough now. It said the additional thing had arrived and she was receiving it. Adis was sitting beside Obiora in the crowd. At some point during her father's words, she had reached for her husband's hand without thinking, and he had taken it, and they were sitting holding hands the way two people sit when they are not yet fully repaired but have turned to face each other again. Later, as the gathering broke and people moved and the conversations of the village resumed their normal patterns, Addis found Chisom at the edge of the compound. "I have been thinking," Addis said, "about what you told me the morning I left for Oguta. You said go and build something beautiful." "I remember," Chisom said. "I thought you meant a home. A life with Obiora." Addis looked at her hands. "But I think now that you meant something else." "I meant whatever was truest," Chisom said. "I didn't know what form it would take. I only knew it had to be built." Addis was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at her sister with the full attention she had perhaps never given her before, not because she had not loved her, but because she had never before understood there was something specific to see. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know all those years that the quiet work would matter? That it was worth doing when nobody was watching?" Chisom considered this seriously, the way she considered things that deserved serious consideration. "Mama told me," she said finally. "And when you are lucky enough to have someone tell you the true thing early enough, you find a way to hold it even when the world is telling you something different." She paused. "And also," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted in the small way it always had, "I was angry enough to prove them wrong." But quietly. Addis laughed. It was a real laugh, the first one that had come out of her whole body in months. As for Obiora, his recovery took longer than the farm's recovery, as the recovery of a man's character always does. But it was real. He returned to business with a fraction of his former capital and a completely different relationship with risk, having learned, at considerable cost, that a foundation matters more than a facade. He consulted Chisom on his decisions now, not with embarrassment but with the genuine respect of a man who has correctly identified who in a room actually knows what they are doing. He and Addis rebuilt their marriage the way Chisom had rebuilt the farm, by going back to the soil and starting with what was actually there rather than what they wished was there. It was slower than the first version. It was also more honest, and what it lacked in spectacle it made up for in substance. Chisom herself, since it matters and since the village needed to know it, was seen one season later in conversation with a trader from a neighboring community named Emeka, a quiet, unhurried man who had come to discuss a supply arrangement and had stayed longer than any supply arrangement required. He was not dazzled by her entrance when she walked into a room. He was drawn to what she said and how she thought and the way she moved through a problem. He came back the following market day. And the one after that. Not with the performance of a suitor but with the honesty of a man who knew what he was looking for and had recognized it. On the day he finally spoke plainly to her, he said, "I am not coming with a delegation and goats. I am coming as myself. I want to know if that is enough." She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the only currency I accept." They married in the dry season. It was not the largest wedding Umuna had seen. But when people looked back on it later, they said it had a quality that was difficult to describe, a feeling of something true being honored. The kind of wedding where you look at the couple and believe them. The village of Umuna did not transform overnight. Belief systems that have been held for generations do not dissolve in a single gathering or a single harvest. But things shifted. In small ways at first, the way things always shift when something true has been said publicly and witnessed. Mothers began to speak differently to their younger daughters, the plain ones, the quiet ones, the ones who stood half a step behind. They began to say things like, "Come, I will show you how this is done," rather than assuming that the showing was for someone else. The market women, specifically Ngozi, began to watch the younger girls differently, looking past the obvious things for the ones that do not announce themselves. Mbik, who had been watching all of it from the particular vantage point of a woman who has seen the full arc of a thing she set in motion, sat one evening in the compound with both her daughters beside her. The sun was going down over Umuna in the slow red way it did in that season. The farm was quiet. The compound was full in a way it had not been full in a long time. She looked at Adis, who was teaching her youngest daughter's friend a recipe, patient now in a way she had never been before, her voice steady and encouraging. She looked at Chisom, who was reading through a new trading agreement by the last of the lights, her accounting book open beside her, her face entirely composed and entirely itself. Big said nothing. She simply looked, and felt the specific deep satisfaction of a woman whose work had come through. The first daughter had beauty. She always would. And beauty, in the end, had not destroyed her. It had simply been the first chapter of a story that required more chapters before it made sense. The second daughter had something the village had spent 20 years failing to name. Not stubbornness, not ambition, not the particular hardness of someone who has decided to prove something. It was simpler and deeper than any of those things. She had been built, quietly and with great care, by a mother who saw further than the road in front of her. And she had taken that building and done the slow, invisible, essential work of becoming the person who holds a family together when everything else falls. Not because the world saw her. Not because anyone was applauding. Because some people understand, in the place where they are most themselves, that the work matters regardless of whether anyone is watching. That the harvest comes from what was planted in the quiet seasons. That the most powerful thing a person can possess is not the thing that makes the room turn when they enter it, but the thing that keeps the room standing when the storm arrives. The village of Omina learned this. Some learned it early. Most learned it late. But they learned it. And years afterward, when a mother on the road in Omina stopped to appraise two daughters passing by, and began the old formulation, the one that started with the beautiful one and ended with the adequate one, an older woman nearby would touch her arm gently and say, "Look again. Look at the quiet one. Look at what she is already building." If this story moved you, please like this video right now and subscribe to this channel. And leave a comment below telling me which moment stayed with you the longest. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this one exist to remind us that the world does not always see us clearly, but that does not mean we are not seen. Keep building. Keep going. We will see you in the next story.